So, welcome indeed to what I think is a very, very special 1 hour that you'll be sharing with myself and Vusi Thembekwayo. It's going to be great. I'm just going to get my technical team to come and assist me for just a minute then. Vusi, if you can just request to join in so that I have you on the conversation. And this is the plan. As we wait for Vusi just in a minute, and waiting for you as well. So I'll tell you what you need to do. When you're watching us, one is you need to be watching, great. Then ask some really good questions, which is fantastic. But also, I need you to tell your friends. So what about tagging all your buddies, all your chommies right away, as many people as you can? Because the reality is, one thing is listening to the president talking, the other is listening to the Minister of Health, and then the health expert, Professor Salim Abdul Karim. That's one thing. But the other thing is trying to understand the impact of what we're experiencing now for you who's employed, for you who was employed, for yourself who's got a business, big business, small business, what it is that you need to be doing. So I think it's a critical masterclass for the next hour that we'll be sharing. So Vusi, you're there. Hi, welcome.
Yeah, hi Ashraf. I hope you're well.
Good to connect with you on a different sort of airwaves. It just shows you how we're all adapting to a very, very different world, isn't it?
The world has changed, my friend. The world has changed.
It certainly has, right? Now, just to, oh goodness, everybody knows you, but let me not assume that. I'm hoping that people who've never watched you before are now tuning in as well, right? So, quick 1 minute introduction of yourself. I mean, it's like a pitch for Vusi Thembekwayo. Describe yourself and what you do.
So I'm a global business speaker. I've had the privilege of being a speaker for 15 years. I've worked in 6 of the 7 continents, I think 72 countries the last time we counted. And I run a VC firm that invests in early stage businesses, what we call venture catalysts. We focus on Series Seed and Series A investments. And on top of that, I run a private equity firm which invests in larger, more mature businesses. So yeah, that's what I spend my time doing, either working with business leaders and advising them on how to navigate chaos. My most popular keynote is called "Leading at the Edge of Chaos," which is interesting because that's kind of where we are now. And then on top of that, I spend my time investing in people and helping them build businesses.
Okay, so let's start with that. I'm not going to speak. I don't plan to speak for more than 30 seconds about the medical aspects. Let's leave that to somebody else, okay? But are we then at the edge of chaos in terms of the economy and therefore what it means to most of the people watching us right now?
Yeah, definitely. In fact, I think we're definitely teetering at the brink, right? And let me tell you how we define chaos. So there are system complexity theories out there around how chaos is defined. But the basic premise behind chaos is that even if you fix the inputs into an environment, the outputs are erratic. So the best way to think about this, if you ever watch the movie Jurassic Park 1, there's a part where Jeff Goldblum is trying to explain the chaos theory. And he takes his hand and he says to the lady looking at him, and he says, drop a drop of water on my hand. And she drops it and the drop of water follows one path. And he wipes it and he says, "Now do that again." And she drops it and the drop of water follows a completely different path. And he says, that's chaos. Chaos is an environment where even if you control the inputs and the environment, the outputs are still erratic. And that's exactly where we are right now. So our state is controlling the inputs in the sense of a policy, particularly around lockdown. The environment remains complex, but they've given very clear, specific instructions around who can be out there and who can't. They've deployed the army. They're deploying more units of the army even now. And so they're doing the best they can to control the inputs. And off the back of that, they then run separate mathematical modelings to see where things could go. But it's still an environment of chaos because the nature of a pandemic is such that it doesn't follow the rules, right? So it could go converse to what they're expecting, which is often why you find that states tend to overreact in times like this.
Okay, so many people watching would understand initially this virus that started a few months ago in China, and it was remote, and now it's a lot closer to us. They understood it then. They understand perhaps there's a need for social distancing. And then there was this emergency, not state of emergency, but certainly an emergency in terms of the disease. Then this was lockdown, then an extended lockdown. Now I hear many people saying they get the medical part of it, they get the health part of it. They don't get the fact that their pipeline is now in grave danger of being switched off completely. It's like that tap that you spoke about earlier on. Well, the water's, you know, it's dripping. It's not coming out the way you want it anymore, and they don't get it. Now, just firstly, what do you tell an employee, an employer as well? What do you tell a business owner who is understandably on side with the need for social distancing, but is offside with, my goodness, I don't have money for bread tomorrow?
Yeah.
What do you tell that person?
I think that's a fantastic question. And I think it's one of those questions about which people need to concern ourselves, because a lot of us tend not to practice empathy. We've forgotten how to be empathetic. We've forgotten how to consider. You're asking about the person who doesn't even have money for tomorrow, but there were people who didn't have money 2 weeks ago. There were, people who live in the informal economy who barely were making it as it is. And then there are what I call, subsistence businesses, survivalist businesses, who in my mind are probably the predominant number of businesses out there who had less than 30 days worth of cash flows in their balance sheet. Those businesses, Ashraf, have been barely making it for the past 2 years. The South African economy has been a nightmare for small businesses for the past 2 years. So they've been barely surviving. And a lot of those business owners have been holding on by their teeth off the back of the promise that it's going to turn someday soon. And all of a sudden, coronavirus hits, then state of disaster, then lockdown, then extended lockdown. And, depending on which account you believe, that lockdown might be extended even further. So for those people, you have to understand that they're feeling anxiety. You have to understand that they are overwhelmed. Yesterday, I was on the phone with a service provider to our business, and she was telling me about how she's had to lay off people in her firm. And then she said to me, I've had to lay off people in my firm. She said, sorry, I wasn't able to get back to you for the past week. It was emotionally exhausting. And she said, I'm completely off social media because I'm anxious, I'm exhausted. And so there are people who are not even following these addresses by the president because they just don't have the emotional capital anymore to sit there anxiously waiting for what is he going to say next. Your question was, what do I say to those people? I wish I could say it's going to be okay, but the truth is that we don't know. What we do know is that there is an other side to this. We don't know where it is, we don't know when it is, but we do know that everything must come to an end. So this will end too. The other thing we know is that how we emerge from this will definitely not be how we went into it. I think we are forever shifted and fundamentally changed in how we do business, in how we interact with each other, and in how we live and exist in our communities. And the third thing I'd say to those people is, even in environments of chaos, there is still opportunity. So once you have within yourself the emotional capital to get back on, it's going to be worth your while to start considering what are the opportunities out there that you can look at, that you can exploit, that you can participate in. Because Ashraf, just while this is happening, people are still living. Retailers are still selling because consumers must still eat, right? So there will definitely be businesses that come out of this stronger. There are businesses that are making a lot of money off this now. But without doubt, there is going to be opportunity at the back of this too.
And I think that's an important point about opportunity, which I want to touch on later on. I just want to tell people who've joined in, you are aware, this maybe just tells you how companies need to pivot, okay? This particular broadcast or Instagram live conversation is brought to you by TEDxGreshamPlace. Now, that's based in KZN or Durban. Now, the plan would have been for them normally to set up an actual physical live event for you to go to. As a result of the lockdown, they've had to pivot, if not permanently, but very, very quickly to keep their brand alive. And one of the ways of doing that is, in fact, to do this. So maybe it's not a classic TEDx talk, but it is a talk certainly brought to you by TEDxGreshamPlace. And you watching us need to understand the type of subtle and not so subtle changes you need to be making. So I hope you enjoy it. Well, there's a lot more to come out of it, okay? Brucey, so we'll talk about the long term just now. I'll just stay with the short term in terms of the immediate need of a business person right now. So you mentioned your colleague who effectively, your friend, was out of business already, and that's like only 5 weeks into lockdown. Now, if it's 3 months, because, lockdown is one thing. We talk about lockdown extension or lockdown light, but in some form, and you made the point, things are not going to be the same again. So here's the question for the immediate term. Somebody who's got a small business who doesn't employ more than 10 people, or maybe 20 at the most, right? Who is already now maybe 1 month away from having his or her revenue streams completely dried up, right? What do you tell that person in terms of their immediate action as opposed to the long-term action?
Whew. I think in the immediate, your greatest asset is going to be having the emotional intelligence, the emotional resilience, as well as the mental strength to deal with the reality. I think there are some people who are hoping that this isn't real. There are some people who are hoping that they can wait this out. There are some people who are hoping that it's not as bad as it looks, and actually it's just a bad dream. And unfortunately, I wish it were different, but it's not. It is real. And you are going to have to deal with the reality of the world that you're in. I had a conversation with my own team on Monday. We have a Monday all hands on deck meeting. And I was quite upset with my team because I felt that they didn't understand the severity of the situation, but I also felt that they didn't move fast enough for us to pivot into the environment of what we're in now. Mm-hmm. And I've been really excited to see their shifts in energy, shifts in approaches with my team members who are understanding that this is not temporary. This has definitely shifted us for the long term. So to the person out there who is understandably looking at this and hoping it's going to go away soon, my advice to you would be presume that this is the new normal. Mm-hmm. Presume that this is long term, and ask yourself, what does my business look like now? Because if you try to fight the forces of physics, you will lose. If you I often make the example that if you climb to the top floor of the Carlton Center in Joburg, stand at the ledge, pray to whichever God you praise, God, Allah, Buddha, and say to them that you don't believe in gravity and jump, you will find that gravity believes in you. So I think this is a similar time. You can't pray away or hope away the time or the moment that we're in. Presume this is the new normal and start asking yourself the question, so how do we exist in this new normal? How do we add value in this new normal? How do we have a voice in this new normal? How do we find clients in this new normal? How do we invoice clients in this new normal? Because there are people out there who are doing it. There are businesses out there that are surviving. Last night, I was talking to an entrepreneur who makes fitness clothing. And I said to her, how's it going? She said, amazing. I said, who's buying tights at this time? She said, no, I'm not selling tights. I'm selling masks.
Okay.
I was like, wow. So you made the change. She said, I made the change quick, fast, and in a hurry. She's got orders from mines, orders from retailers, orders from consumers, orders from farms. The business is just coming in. So she didn't sit there and go, but I've built a production line to make tights. She went, I've got a production line. How do I make this production line relevant for the moment and the now? Presume this is the new normal and ask yourself, how do you exist in this new normal?
Okay, so here's the point. Now you are aware that I run a project called Champion South Africa, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things that we've been focusing on now specifically, Vusi, is what I call the champion mind, okay? Meaning get the mind or the mindset right to think like a champion and the rest will follow. Interestingly, and I think you'd appreciate this, do you agree that in South Africa, the concept of a champion mind or what you're talking about, having the mental strength as the first step in surviving this chaos we're going through now is underplayed, meaning people just don't get it, that it's the mental strength that will allow you to survive on the one hand and also give you the common sense of not trying to jump off the Carlton Center and find a different way to do business in the first place.
And I think in part it's because people live, I recognize that there are people in South Africa whose realities are so harsh, that if you tell them about mental strength, they think that you're smoking something. I'm going to give you an example, right? So for instance, let me come at it a different way. A friend of mine the other day asked me, she said, why is it that there are people who, you know, even though they know there's a lockdown, aren't keeping to the rules of a lockdown? And I said to her, because there are some people who've built up a mental resilience to suffering. So you have to consider the person who grows up in a township, who grows up in a shack, who lives in a, you know, 2-room shack with 7 or 8 other family members. That person's entire life is built around mental abstinence. So that person's entire existence is built around them believing they can thrive even when their conditions are so dire. So when you go to that person and you say to them, you need to stay home because lockdown is dangerous. They go, what are you talking about lockdown is dangerous? My life is dangerous. The fact that I don't have an income is dangerous. The fact that I live in a shack is dangerous. The fact that I don't have medical aid is dangerous. The fact that I use, you know, public transport and I'm on a train where people are right surfing on a train, that's dangerous. You think a virus that I can't see from a country I've never been to is going to kill me? I don't buy it. So I'm going along about way of saying a part of the difficulty we have with connecting people's mental strength and the mental conversation with people's lived reality is that for a lot of people, their lived reality is so harsh that if you tell them the mental strength is the difference, they don't see it. And I do think we underappreciate that as a country, but I think we're coming into a time where people are finally realizing just how important it's going to be.
Okay, so let's stay with the mental strength for the moment. So people have strength or they don't have it, and often they don't even know the difference, okay? But if you agree, and I agree, so we both agree, that mental strength, that resilience, and wherever it comes from is critical in terms of making the type of decisions needed to survive. So if a person doesn't know it and they don't even know how to find it, what's your advice to them? What should they be doing right now about finding this mental strength?
So the first thing to say is, like all forms of strength, mental strength is developed. Nobody's born with it. And that's one of the fallacies people have when they meet people who are mentally strong, is the presumption that that person is just like that. None of us are just like that. There are different levels of strength when it comes to mental strength and different levels of maturity when it comes to emotional maturity. Both of those are developed. And so you can develop a mental strength by first engaging in subject matter that's difficult for your mind to wrap its head around. That's often difficult for a lot of us because we like echo chambers with people who see the world the way we see the world. So follow somebody that you don't necessarily like. Engage with a point of view that you don't necessarily like to engage with. Read literature that you wouldn't find enjoyable, right? That's a part of how you begin to develop your mental strength.
But because that's what? When you read things you don't enjoy, when you read things you don't understand, what does it do to you?
Thinking for the mind is like flexing the bicep at the gym. The more you think, the more you engage, the more you interrogate, is the stronger the mind becomes, especially when you have to deal with instances of extreme volatility. So one of the things to try, and it's going to sound an airy-fairy example, but it actually works. One of the things to try is meditation. Take some time with yourself and have a conversation with yourself about your experience of the world and how you're seeing the world and how you're interacting with the world. It's a very powerful way of engaging with yourself. A lot of us tend to forget that you can separate your subconscious from your physical. That your mind is not your body. And that's why you can look at your body independent of yourself and experience your body independent of yourself, right? You read a lot of this with people who, if you ever study people who've been in solitary confinement, when they ask them how do they survive it. If you read Viktor Frankl's book, The Man's Search for Meaning, when they asked him how did he survive the concentration camps, his trick was he was able to separate his subconscious from his flesh. In other words, the way he experiences the world, sees the world, from literally the way he's feeling at that moment. And so getting into that space is a great way to develop that mental strength. The second way, as I've said, is to engage with audiences, people, conversations that you don't necessarily agree with. So the way I do it is I follow people whose views I find diabolical. And I don't follow them with the intent of harassing them, of lambasting them, of correcting them. I follow them with the intent of interrogating what they're saying and seeing if it makes sense and trying to understand it. Me trying to see the world from their point of view is a part of how you exercise mental strength, right? And then the third way to do it is to have affirmations. Now, there are some affirmations that you shout out to yourself. I'm not the shout out affirmations to yourself guy. So I have gentle reminders in my space that are affirmations to me, artifacts, pieces. There's a vase right in front of me that says love. Why is the vase that in front of me saying love in a place where I shoot all of my content? Because I want to remind myself every single time that that's how I want to approach conversations, with a spirit of love and giving to other people, right? So that's a part of how you develop it. Absolutely.
Interesting. I mean, I've got a globe, right? So map of the world in a globe form that's on my desk, and you can't see it now. But one of the reasons I have that is it helps me always understanding the big picture, and that's the type of thing you're talking about, right? Either words or use things you can hold on to that has deeper meaning, right?
And I do want to say this because I think this is such an important information. Sorry, I don't know what happened there, Ashraf. But I do want to say this because I think it's an important statement to say. Strong affirmations won't make the reality less real. So I don't want people going, if I say it's going to be okay, then when I wake up tomorrow, lockdown's going to be over. No, that's not the way the world works. Strong affirmations don't make the reality less real. Strong beliefs don't make the reality less real. So you don't affirm to yourself or work on your belief system because you want to make the reality less real. You affirm to yourself and work on your belief system because you want to make your reality more bearable. That's what you're doing. It's a survival mechanism. It's not an escape mechanism. And people who criticize affirmations, meditation, belief systems often don't understand what the role of an affirmation or a belief system is. The role of an affirmation or a belief system is not an escape mechanism. It's not going to make your reality less real, but it is a way to cope with that reality so that you don't lose your mind. Because I think the point about it is self-preservation. There's so much going on, so much, you got to think about it, that in the best of times, with the economy growing, as a human being, you still have negative self-talk. You still have self-doubt. You still have bad belief systems. You still have haters. You still have people out there trying to pull you down. What more in an environment like this, where the environment is now trying to destroy you and is hostile? So the reason you affirm, the reason you work on your belief systems, the reason you work on your internal dialogue is so that you have the emotional resilience to see this period through, so that you don't lose your mind, so that you don't forget who you are, and so that you recognize that who you are is not what you are. That even if you go through a period of difficulty and there are some losses, you will come out of this probably stronger, probably better, probably more agile, and probably more determined.
Well, it's interesting you say that, and I'll just label this point, then we'll move on, that there are people clearly watching us from different religious faiths. I'm Muslim, many could be Christian, others would be following the faith of Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhist, Rastafaris, and then many others may not follow any faith. And that's the choices we have, we make, right? But what they all have in common, and also powerful political leaders, think Nelson Mandela in particular, is the combination of spending time in communal groups, right? But spending time alone. And that's exactly what you're saying. All of them had their retreats. So you can't just spend time together with people, but you need to take a time out, and we can do that now, of spending time alone to reflect on all the things you've said, well, earlier and above, right?
If I can just, final point on this. So first, when lockdown started, I have to confess that I was really irritated. I was irritated because we're working on critical projects in my businesses. They're very important things that we have to deliver. And I felt that this was just, it was a hindrance, and it was certainly a hamper. It would hamper our progress. I understood why. I supported and still continue to support the president in the initiatives that he's taken. So I don't want to be misunderstood. But that said, I was still irritated. And I think it's important for people to realize that you can own your emotion whilst being mature. You can go, it's irritating. I don't like it. But okay, if this is what we need to do, that's what we need to do. I did not anticipate the gift of this lockdown. So here's been the gift for me. First, I've had the opportunity of spending time with my kids, over the past 3 weeks that I don't think I've spent in the past 3 years. It's been absolutely amazing. Second, I'm finally looking at the parts of my life and my business that I was always too busy to look at. Because I was always too busy, always going to the next meeting, always doing the next thing. All of a sudden, I'm forced every morning to draft an agenda for my life. That's my agenda for my life because I'm in lockdown. Not the agenda the world wrote for me. Not the meeting I had to be in, the board meeting I had to be in, the staff member who walks into my office without an appointment, the phone call I have to take that wasn't scheduled. Now it's life at my pace, in my direction. And I think that's a part of what I'm talking about with this mental resilience. It's not that my reality is less real. It's that I've chosen to amplify a different perspective of that same reality.
Yeah, good point. Okay, let's move on. And let me ask you this. I mean, of course, you're an investor. You do lots of different things, but you also do lots of talking. Something you do and I do, right? And I'm aware that there were 3 events that I should have been talking, program directing, emceeing in the last 3 weeks. Okay, all gone. I would say that for yourself, right? So just a quick insight into how has your work situation changed?
So I was going on a global tour. I was supposed to be in Spain, in Germany. We were thinking about adding Italy, and then news broke in Italy, and it got really bad there. But I was certainly doing Spain, Germany, Mozambique. I had just finished Uganda and Zambia, as well as the US and the UK. All of that gone. All of it, completely gone. It took me 2 days to deal with the reality. The first thing I did when I heard from my sales team is I said, well, can we not find another way to do it? And by the grace of God, we have been able to move some of those events to do them online. And then the second thing I did was I said, okay, so this is the new normal. This is the reality. What do we do now? So focus our energies on what can we do? How do we stay ahead of the curve? And then the third thing I did was I asked myself, if I'm going through this, what are my clients going through? All right. So let me get on the phone with my clients and ask them, how can I help you? Not how do I make more money? Not how do you pay me? I recognize what you're going through. Is there anything I can do to help you? And doing those 3 things, particularly the latter, allowed me to step out of my own environment and my own self-pity, and see it from somebody else's perspective. Because you have to recognize that if somebody's flying Vusi over to Germany to speak at an auditorium of 5,000 people, they went through the cost of booking the auditorium of 5,000 people. They've got to refund 5,000 people. They've probably bought 5,000 books of mine. They've paid me an awful lot of money to be there. They've taken a lot of upfront cost to make the event a success. And all of a sudden, so I think a lot of us see things purely from our suffering rather than ask yourself, what's the other person going through? So if you're in this conversation and you're employed, rather than ask yourself, am I still going to have a job? Why don't you ask yourself, what's my manager going through? What's my boss going through? What's the CEO going through? What's the company going through? What are the suppliers of the company going through? So if you're working at an EdCon, all too real that the first thing Grant Patterson said wasn't that he wasn't going to pay staff. It was that he wasn't going to pay the suppliers. But those suppliers employ people too. Those people have families too. Those families have to eat too. So I think a lot of us get so caught in our own suffering that we don't have the capacity to see the suffering of others. And allowing yourself to step out of your own suffering and see the suffering of others is a great way of recognizing just how fortunate you are. And fortune isn't always about what we receive, but it's sometimes about what we are spared. That there's a level of suffering that you are spared that somebody else is going through, and that's your fortune at that time.
Okay, lots to reflect on. Hopefully, you guys watching us can, if you're enjoying all of this, and you should be enjoying it, give us a thumbs up. Okay, so I'm certainly doing that, and maybe I'll have a chance to ask a few questions before we wrap up in about 15-20 minutes or so. I think, right? Vusi, let's then talk about pivoting a business. So somehow a person watching us, their business will survive, but only just. So they don't have to maybe lay off people, but they understand that their market is not the same as it was last month, right? What advice, would you give them?
So I think the first thing to do is try and make scientific decisions, not emotional decisions. Very, very, very hard to do. Very hard to do. So if, for instance, so first, exhaust all the options that are out there, particularly in terms of the stimulus packages that are out there. Exhaust the options, so don't act prematurely. Second, don't panic, right? Because panic is not a strategy. It's not a strategy. So it's not a tool set, it's not a skill set. Panic is nothing more than an emotional response to an environment to which you are unfamiliar, that draws from you the energy and creativity that you need to deal with that environment. That's what panic is. So don't panic, right? And I know, sometimes when I catch myself saying to people, don't panic, I feel like the guy walking into an auditorium that's burning down. And he says, don't panic, the room's burning down. The first thing people are going to do is panic because you said don't panic. But really don't panic, right? And then the third thing I would say is, off the base of make scientific but not emotional decisions, is plan your business properly. So write down, where are you at financially? What are the obligations that you have? And what is your runway? So your burn rate is how much money you're spending at the end of every month. Your runway is how much money do you have and how many months can it cover? How much runway do you have? And have an honest conversation with yourself, right? Then ask yourself the question, which of my current functions do I need performed to keep the business alive? Which of my current functions are absolutely fundamental? And then you ask yourself the question, and who are the best people to perform those functions? So what you want to do is take ownership of the situation, not have the situation data to you. Get ahead of the curve, see if you can get some cost savings up front so that you have enough runway to survive this situation, right? If you don't do that, then you're always sitting at the back waiting for life to happen. And, being a recipient of karma is not something I'm preferred to. I like to drive my own karma. So be out there and see if you can take more initiative and more ownership.
Okay, I just want to shout out once again that maybe a chance for 3 or 4 questions. So this is what you need to be doing, okay? For all of you listening, and thanks for the many thumbs up. I see them in the big numbers, okay? So do it once again. But when you're asking the question, don't ask like, how's it, Vusi? Yeah, I DM'd you. Come on, let's not waste this opportunity, okay? What I'm suggesting you do, ask a very specific question that can appeal to a broad section of the following. So you cannot ask a very technical question about your business only that will require Vusi to answer by asking you 5 more questions, because we're not going to get there. So ask a question that you know will appeal to a broad audience, because that's really what it is. I'll pick up maybe 3 or 4 in a couple of minutes time. Vusi, what would you tell? So you've given some really important advice already, okay? What would you tell, however, a person in business who is doing nothing else but hoping? They don't have the money. They know the money is running out. They just saying, they're just hoping tonight when the president talks, because I think he will, that somehow he's just going to make a plan and things will come right. And the rest of the time they are moaning and as concerned as we all are, paranoid, but they're doing nothing else beyond that.
Whew. I want to answer your question, but again, with the spirit of love. And I come at this and approach it with a sense of empathy. So my answer is going to be strong, but I hope that people understand the substance of my answer, right? One of the rude awakenings for many South Africans out there is that South Africa has, in its latter day, become, in part, not completely, a nanny state. And it was done with good intent, but we have nannied people, and people all of a sudden are being asked to stand on their own twos. Now, I know that that's a difficult statement to make, but, I just want to make this point again. So, in South Africa, if you didn't have an income, there was a way the state sought to provide you with an income. Mm-hmm. If you had a child and couldn't support them, there was a way the state sought to provide you with that child. If you were indigent, there was the state intervening, right? If you didn't have health, the state provided health. If you couldn't pay for education, the state provided education, etc., etc. One of the things people are realizing now is that the state itself has limited capacity. So if you're sitting on the sideline of this and hoping that the state is going to take care of you, I don't know how to say this to you without sounding unempathetic, without sounding cold, but the state is not. The state itself can't take care of itself right now. When you have to understand that when the South African government says we're willing to let SAA go and 4,700 people lose work, and the turmoil that will cause for them politically, because the union that's in SAA is a union that's part of COSATU, which is part of the Tripartite Alliance. When the state gets that desperate, you have to recognize that you are not top priority in terms of the state anymore. So I think if you're sitting on the sidelines and hoping somebody else is going to take care of you, I don't know how to say this to you without sounding difficult, without sounding cold. It's not. You're going to have to take care of you. You know, and those are the hard truths. My mom used to say to me, the thing about the hard truth is you might say it's hard, it doesn't make it less true. It's still the truth. So I think that's what I would say to that person. But also recognizing that we do have different privileges. You know, you and I, Ashraf, have the privilege of being in this conversation right now. We have the privilege of a smartphone. We have the privilege of data. We have the privilege of the Queen's English, and we can connect. There are people in our country who just don't have those privileges. And I recognize for them the amount of suffering that they're going through. You know, when donations were being made to the various funds and trusts, I made my donation, and I remember saying to my wealth manager, he was asking me if we needed to talk to our PR agency about it, and I said, absolutely not. And he said to me, well, you know, it's a great opportunity. And I said, the reason we will not tell anyone what we've done is because how you take away dignity from the poor is by amplifying your patronage to the poor. When what you give is about what you give, not about the spirit with which you gave it. So, you know, I do think that for those of us who are more privileged, we are called on to give as much as we can. But I also think that those of us who are more privileged have the obligation to make the giving about the gift, not about the giver.
Okay, that's a very important point. I mean, just on that topic, and I know we digress slightly. Yes, I realized very quickly from a champion South African point of view that, you know, we can't do things we've never done before. So when there's a call to go out to certain townships and give away goodies or hampers, if I've never done it, how do I switch on in one day and learn how to do a skill like that? It's just ridiculous. So the plan has always been to channel monies to organizations to do a better job. Notwithstanding the point you made about brand, okay? However, one of the things that we trying to call out now is like, I'm just calling it adopt a family for want of a better word. No branding, simply identify, everybody knows someone, right? Who's in a far more desperate situation than we are, right? And in most cases, they would reside in townships because that's part of South Africa's spatial planning, right? So if we identify that person could well be the family of the gardener that's working in your home, to literally suggest to them to say two things. How can I assist you directly financially for the next 3-4 months? And then the very important one, how can I assist you with mentoring, telephonic mentoring over the next 3 months to help you make the right type of decisions? So that type of what I call support a family, I think would be far more profound. It doesn't need any branding whatsoever. Do you see that? And of course, it avoids people, and it gives them the agency when they receive money into their accounts to not stand in queues, but the agency to buy that what they've always enjoyed.
Exactly. And I think that's so important. You know, we're not alone, Ashraf. Literally news breaking now on the Bloomberg terminal. There are now 26 million unemployed Americans. 26 million. That's half of South Africa's population, for those of you who are wondering, that are unemployed just off the back of this coronavirus. 4.46 million added this week alone. And this is not the end of it. There is still much, much more to come. So it's a global issue. It's not going to go away. And I do think that, again, for those of us who can, if you can lend a hand in whichever small way that you can.
Yeah, very, very important that we do that. Let's talk about your thoughts on government then. Yes, you mentioned they can't look after the SAA, but they've had to find out a way to assist, certainly from a health point of view, but many small businesses and many people unemployed, and that's taken them 500 billion rands, as you know, approximately 10% of a typical South African GDP. So that's the amounts we're talking about, and they don't even have the money themselves. They've got some part of it because of repositioning their budget, but others they're going to have to borrow themselves. What are your thoughts about that versus, and of course, organizations like the IMF comes up and many people have different views on that. What are your thoughts about the government doing that to try and protect its citizens with money they don't actually have versus another view is like, don't go to them, find another way to do this?
Yeah, so, I hear you and I think you're right. First of all, I think that when it comes to economics, if you put 10 economists in the room, you'd get 10 different point of views if you ask them the same question. And they would all start their answer with ceteris paribus, all else equal. So I think the point I'm making there is that you can get as many analysts as possible to analyze a scenario and a situation. I'm very careful to criticize because I recognize that our authorities, particularly ministers, the president, and people who work in Treasury, have access to information that I don't have access to. So one of the mistakes we make, I think a lot of us who criticize, is we criticize with a presumption that public knowledge is all knowledge. It's not. There is more information out there, and there's often information that we're not privy to that is information that's critical in how those decisions are arrived at. And that's, again, that point about empathy. Just if, the Minister of Finance is making a decision about sources of finance, I have to consider that he knows something I don't, and that's the best route for all of us. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to me that's how we are, that I'm going to spend my life criticizing what I don't understand. In terms of the question you asked around, should they approach the various funding institutions? Again, I take it that they've looked at the funding mix that's available. They have looked at what's best for the country, and they have looked at what helps us maintain and retain our national sovereignty, but protect the economic status of the country. So that's kind of my perspective of it. And I think absent of any information that would be, that would suggest that there's something so nefarious happening behind the scenes, I move from the premise that people are doing the best they can.
Yeah. And I made the point, I probably tweeted about it the other day, that I think mistakes have been made and they probably will be made. But at this point in time, we are in this boat and we're rowing upstream, and we need to hope that those strong guys who are rowing, and it's not you and I, it's the leadership of the country, they row in the right direction. And if they go slightly off course, that they have the wisdom to get on board. Because I think the one thing we can probably agree with is I cannot see any leader of the country and the government, and it doesn't matter which political party that they all belong to, I cannot see any one of them not caring for the better interest of the entire South Africa.
I mean, just a final note, and you made such an important point. If you'll allow me, let me just buttress the point that you've just made.
Go ahead, yeah.
One of the difficulties about times of complexity, and for the people who've just joined the conversation, my specific area of expertise is that I've studied leaders who lead through complexity and chaos, right? That's literally what I've spent the past 15 years of my life doing, studying leaders who've led through complexity and chaos. Great examples in South Africa, like when Vusi Thembekwayo in the 1980s, in the heat of apartheid, right in the middle of the Baskap and the Swart Gevaar and the hostile wars between the ANC and the IFP and the bombings of restaurants, right in the heat of apartheid, Vusi Thembekwayo made the decision to go and open up ShopRite stores in townships. And I remember spending time with him and trying to understand what was happening in his mind. So that's where I draw a lot of information and content and strategy from, is studying leaders who have led through chaos. One of the mistakes we make as South Africans is we love to get everything right. When you're leading through an environment of chaos, an environment of complexity, you're not going to get everything right. And so we will have to learn to forgive ourselves, but we will also have to learn to forgive our leaders when they get a few things wrong, as long as the intention was to do the right thing. I think there's so many people sitting on the sidelines right now saying what you not considered with politicians, because I think that they'll find the opportunity to try and maximize our collective suffering. Sorry, Ashraf, we lost you there. Carry on.
Yeah, we lost you a little bit then. I mean, you lost me on that side. I'm not too sure why, but that's fine. Let's. Okay, so I think you made the point about leaders will make mistakes, and I think that's an important point because we often will dwell on the one mistake and magnify that to above the other 9 that leadership is getting right in the most trying of circumstances. And this is the point. Not one of us, not me, not you, not everybody watching us, not any South African leader, not any world leader has had the template to deal with what we're dealing with right now. And I think we need to just empathize with making decisions in this turmoil that you alluded to earlier on, right?
Can I make one final point on this? Because I think it's such an important point that you raised, Ashraf. Here's what people don't understand about leadership that happens in times of complexity and chaos. Leadership in times of complexity and chaos is not about making every decision right. It's about quantums of decisions. Here's what that means. If I've got to make 5 decisions and 2 of those decisions have a net effect of 80% of the outcome and the remaining 3 have a net effect of only 20% of the outcome, if I get the 3 wrong and the 2 right, what we tend to do as the South Africans, we focus on the fact that you got 3 decisions wrong rather than the fact that actually 80% of your decision process was correct in the first place. So we are going to have to focus a lot more on the quantum in terms of the impact of the decision rather than whether or not every single decision was correct.
And what for you that would be the quantum, the impact? If we fast forward to 1 year from now, what would be the right decision? I know earlier you said economists to 10, they have different views. What would be the right decision?
Easy. So the first quantum decision right now is whether or not the Reserve Bank not printing money is the correct thing to do. That's a quantum decision. And there are people who sit on either side of the debate about that. The second quantum decision is whether or not the Reserve Bank is reducing rates fast enough to stimulate monetary policy. A second one. And there are people who are on both sides of the debate and who differ with each other. The third quantum decision will be about whether or not the stimulus packages the state has made available have been effective. The fourth will be about whether or not the state has the transmission mechanism to get those stimulus packages into the real economy. Because the state can provision 500 billion. Whether or not that 500 billion lands up in people's lives is going to be a different question altogether. And so we are going to have to focus ourselves with whether or not people made people made the right decision, not whether or not people did the right thing. I think we focus so much on the input, we forget what the intended outcome was. And sometimes the intended outcome is more important than what the considered input should have been.
Good point. I'm going to pick out, some people have commented. There's lots of thumbs up. I can tell you that, Vusi. You can check it up later on because I understand that this particular broadcast will be saved and you can go TEDxGreshamPlace for about a full day thereafter. So tell your friends about it, okay? Some questions. Well, Natasha saying, will your question be answered in the session? If you can just ask the question again, Natasha, I'll try and do that because there's been just so many of them, right? So please do that. Let me just pick out a couple. As a youth, we need the right leadership, so our vote will really count for something. I'm with you. That's from the Bridge Technologies. Absolutely. No real solution, says Yolanda, for the new problem. How would the government have gotten access to the money? What's needed? No precedent. What's right? I think that's a point that's been made. There are different ways of doing things. Somebody called maybe Shepherd saying, blessed to have him as a South African. I think they're talking about you, Vusi, not me. I would vote for him if he was from my country, so I presume you're outside of the country. And then another one, Vusi, your mindset, outstanding. Vusi for the seat, Vusi for president. Something I've asked you before as I've hosted you on the radio shows that I've done. But here's it, Vusi. What is this? What have we learned, or what are we learning as South Africa from all of this? Now, I'm talking about putting all the different cocks together. What is it that we're learning from what we're practically doing that we can then bottle and apply well beyond COVID-19?
I've got a couple of thoughts. The first for me, which has been fascinating, is that actually our state can do its job. And this is going to be an unpopular one with people who support certain political parties. But over the past 26 years, we've been fed the idea that our state has not had the capacity to do its job. And yet, over the COVID crisis in Gauteng, MC Lesotho moved very quickly to find housing for people who were homeless. We've been able to provision water for the poorest, the most downtrodden in the rural areas who don't have water provisioning. There seems to be an attempt to make sure that there's a continuation in the education system and the curriculum, particularly for basic education. Some of the universities have now moved some of their programs online. Banks are allowing us to transact without using banking, without charging us switch fees, as well as none of us having to access banking branches. So if there's one thing that stepped out of this, is that the state and big business actually can do their jobs. They can facilitate a country that works when the chips are down and when the moment calls for it. You know, why has Human Settlements not been able to house people over the past 26 years? We've had housing backlog building up, but all of a sudden come coronavirus and we're able to provision housing for those people and we're able to provision accommodation for those people.
So
where was the ingenuity at the time? You know, why did we need to wait for a crisis before we did something?
Okay, I have a feeling we're going to probably get cut off in the next minute or so. So here's the quick one. So you're quite right. The state is not just doing its job, excuse me, but they're also showing an absolute willingness to deliver in terms of service delivery to people that for 20 odd years were neglected, like the most fundamental, the basic things like water and homes, right? Why do you think there's the shift? So one is the capacity to deliver, but the other is the willingness to want to deliver in the first place. Now, how do you understand that we are now scoring well on both accounts?
It's simple. It's a psychology thing. It's like, it's like any team that's facing relegation in a soccer league. All of a sudden, the team members show up earlier. All of a sudden, the coach is more committed. All of a sudden, the team owner is more committed. Crises have a great way of galvanizing people because a crisis gives us all a single view of what the problem is. So if you ask any South African what the problem is right now, the problem is not racism. The problem is not our national divide. The problem is not our politicians. The problem is not corruption. We'll all tell you the problem is coronavirus. And because of that, we're all now galvanized towards fighting a single enemy. That's why they say, never waste a good crisis.
Absolutely. I think back to apartheid is the problem. I think back at the 2010 World Cup, and the problem was how do we show the world how good we really are? And COVID-19 may just be another one. Vusi, I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you for your time. It's been wonderful talking to you. We're going to save this and hopefully spread this. I'll get organizers from TEDxGreshamPlace to do just that. Give out your, people know your Twitter handle, I think, but give me one Instagram handle that they can follow.
Yeah, my Instagram handle, all of my social medias is the same page. Facebook, LinkedIn, IG, as well as Twitter. Vusi Thembekwayo, my full name.
Okay, great. Listen, thumbs up to you, my friend, and best wishes. And keep on inspiring the nation, because we all on one side in this thing, which I've always said, which is not just surviving the COVID-19, but to build South Africa from a mid-table nation into a champion nation. You can follow me, Ashraf Garda. So spell it out, ASHRAFGARDA. Hopefully you've got all of that. But also Champion South Africa. You can follow us on Instagram as well as on Twitter. And I will start a new podcast for Champion South Africa and the Ashraf Garda Show, both podcast, YouTube, and it's happening imminently. So do follow us. I'd like to get your thoughts on that. Vusi, thanks for your time as always. We'll chat soon, eh?
See you soon, brother. Inshallah.
Thank you. Inshallah, indeed. Thank you. Indeed, by the way, talking about